New World has a progression issue, and I use the word issue with a little bit of caution because I actually think for some people it might actually make the game one of the more casual friendly MMOs out there. So let me jump into the game and let's sort of explain it a little bit what I'm talking about. To speak about progression in New World, there's sort of a lot of history that we need to basically bring up. When the game went live, when it was first released, we had a hidden watermark gear score system. So you know how items right now, they have gear score? Well, you also had like one that was on your character that you needed to raise up, and then that would control the quantity or the quality of your drops, So you couldn't get gear score 600 drops without being high watermark gear score 600. That was very quickly changed to expertise, but we had that system basically for 2 years. Only in the expansion did this change. Now, some of the progression that we used to have was Ward and Bane. So when you were doing dungeons, I know some of you know this by the way, I'm not going to dwell on it too far, but just to explain. So when you were doing dungeons, the dungeon would typically have one or multiple types of enemies in there, and you would have to have a gear set that would have the Ward perk on it. And ideally you'd want a weapon that had the Bane on it so you did more damage. In the expansion, that went away. So that whole system's gone. Right? I don't need to dwell on it too much because it's gone. What we have now is more like other MMOs. Whatever you go out in the world and you do, whatever gear score you craft, whatever gear you collect from, I don't know, maybe like the PvP reward track or something, whatever gear score you get, you just get. I like it, that's showing me that I've got the vengeance there. Sorry, Baggins. But yeah, like whatever you get, you get. And in theory, that means there's no like hidden mark. So if you could literally just complete the most difficult content, like if you can do an M3, then you would in theory be able to get gear score, I think it's a 695 to 700 gear score, right? Now the problem here is that you need to have a minimum gear score to even do this content, which isn't necessarily a problem, I'm just sort of explaining how it works. So you can't do that content to get 700 gear score straight away because you need to go through the gear score. As you level up or you're at like level 65, you need to get better and better gear. And the progression for PvE sort of made sense, right? You do a regular that gets you gear from up to I think 675, and then I can't remember the exact numbers, but you know, some of them are basically 675 to 700, some of them maybe like 690 to 700 and then 695 to 700. I've completely forgot those numbers, don't quote me on them. And for PvP, there's a bit of a problem with PvP straight away, right? Because the only way you get gear is either from the faction vendor, which is all 675, or the PvP reward track, or the Outpost Rush boxes and stuff like that, the Arena box as well. If I'm honest, that's all RNG, apart from the faction vendor. The faction vendor gear is sort of okay for PvP, by the way, because 25 gear score, not really going to be like the end all of competitiveness. Sure, it's better to be gear score 700, but it doesn't really matter that much. And everything's getting scaled up to 675 anyway, so really not that bad. I think PvP's problem is simply just pure RNG that you can't really have any control over. I think the boxes might now from Outpost Rush might be loot biased. Don't quote me on that, I'm not 100% sure. But all the reward track and stuff like that, it's just too RNG. And honestly, if you're a PvP player, you're mostly bothered about the perks and what armor it is, so like medium or heavy, that kind of thing. I think PvP's main problem is that it's just not very consistent, and a lot of the boxes from like Outpost Rush, like if I just open some Outpost Rush boxes, if I can find some, let's say I just opened this, there's a very good chance that I wouldn't even get, like I'll get some purples which are completely just salvageable. Like there's no point, it's easy if I just buy a 3 perk iron from the trading post. But I might get some 3 Bisp perk gloves or something. Now, in this case, I don't actually think any of these are that great. But you see what I mean? It's just completely RNG. Now, PvE is also RNG, but because of loot biasing, typically you get better gear. But in theory, you could be level 65, do an Outpost Rush, and get this gear, right? It's all now about what gear you actually get versus any kind of like hidden score. And then this is really where the game, I don't know, I'm bugged there. This is really where the game, for me, sort of falls apart a little bit. If you are a fresh level 65, like let's say you just hit 65 today, it's actually quite easy to gear up to gear score 700. There's a variety of different ways you can do it. There's some decent items here, for example. One item that I was using right at the very start when the expansion went live was Soul Pollen, because it was just a very good ring. But there's other items on here as well. Eventually, I think the Frigid Dawn stuff should be on here, even though it's not right now. But when I'm streaming, people will often suggest just a named item that might actually be pretty good for me. Now, obviously, to do this, you need to have dense mutating materia. The shortcut was to basically do the season pass because you get some of that on there. but obviously you can just do M1, M2s and stuff like that anyway, and you get more. So it's not that hard to do, and it's not that hard to be relatively consistent. Now, one of the big things is upgrading the named items with the chromatic seals, but we'll come on to that in a minute, I'm sure. Another thing that you can do is simply come to the trading post, and when you're here, let's say, and I'm not calling this BIS, what I actually think is that it's quite easy to get to gear score 700 or get very high gear score with like pretty decent gear, but it's quite hard to get BIS, and I'll sort of show that in a little graph in a minute. But let's just say I pick 2 okay perks, Elemental Aversion, and let's say I pick Health as well. As I said, I'm not calling this BIS, and let's say I pick 675, so it's all legendary stuff. I mean, it's not, but you know what I mean. Higher chance. And you might not want any of these. Like, for example, that Pylon Burst wouldn't necessarily make too much sense in most dex builds, but you could take this, right? Gear score 682, you could buy these gloves, you can buy enough, and now honestly here the prices aren't super cheap, but cheap enough. And honestly, you could probably just like get rid of health, and you see like they get really cheap. I mean, you wouldn't want the focus on these, which is probably why they're like 66 gold, but you know, these are relatively cheap. You can get very high gear score quite easily. The main issue in New World is to get like BIS perfect perks, and I think this is where the progression sort of falls down in the main. So let's say I'm doing like a medium Shuriken Heals build right now, right? I'm not calling this like the best build or anything, I was just doing it last night on stream. But BIS is very dependent on what build you're trying to achieve. So for example, I'm trying to do a Shuriken Heals build in this specific set. Now I actually need to replace this helm, I just haven't found anything better yet. Because in this build I'm using Sword and Shield and Spear, but I was originally using Great Sword and Spear. So that's why I have Relentless Freedom, but I don't need it anymore, but I just haven't found anything better for the Shuriken Heals or Health just yet. I'm probably going to upgrade one of the PvP items, I just haven't done it yet. But I did craft, for example, these gloves, Shuriken Fort, Shuriken Heals, Leeching Cyclone. I actually used a chromatic seal to get that. I was sort of hoping for health because it would be generic, but it came out Shuriken Fort, and I was like, actually, that's much better. To be fair to the PvP reward track, I did get this from the PvP reward track, which also has Shuriken Heals and Health, and then I put on Enfeebling Skewer because it just makes sense. But my point is, depending on your specific build will depend on what specific perks you want. And I could argue till I'm blue in the face what's better and what's not. I'm not really sure, I just watch Murkrow's videos, right? My point is, it's generally quite easy to get high gear score, it's quite hard to get the exact BIS perks. And if I was going to badly show you this on a graph, it would look something like this. Now I did this on stream and I'll explain it, it's not really perfect, but let me get to it. So what I have on here is I'm comparing 2 games, WoW and New World. Technically, the 100% strength ratio wouldn't make any sense, but let's just presume that the top of the line for each game is the maximum you can be. It's BIS for that game at that moment, okay? And what I'm explaining here is that for New World, you can get like very high percentage of your good gear, most of your strength, very quickly. Okay. However, that last little bit, and it's hard to show a very slight angle when I hand drew it, takes a long time because you need specific BIS. I said time. What I mean is basically gold. If you have a lot of gold, you can do it quite quickly, right? You can just craft the stuff. You can just buy other people's Azoth Inductors. But if you were playing just on yourself, it would take you a long time to do that because you wouldn't have all the armoring, weaponsmithing, all the clothes, all the gold that you would need, etc. Okay? So that's why it's time. Technically, I think it's gold, right? If you wanted me to whack it in, it's technically gold because if you have gold, you can just, you know, get the stuff in New World. Whereas something like WoW, what happens is that it's relatively easy and not too hard to like catch up. Like everybody's sort of going at the same space, time-wise. And then it sort of like becomes to a cap, right? Everybody gets capped. And then what happens? A new patch, a new expansion or what have you, that all starts again. I think they do it actually per patch, right? And I mean, technically it's more like this. It doesn't actually, I don't think you actually get lowered, but whatever, right? Just bear with the theme. So this for me explains New World's progression. Now, obviously what happens is it stays like this for a long time, maybe a year, maybe 2 years, depending on the expansion or whatever we get. And then that'll happen again, okay? And then it'll be the same thing. And for me, I don't think this is working that well because for a lot of people who are satisfied without having like pure actual BIS, Bissy Wissy, there becomes a bit of a lack of motivation to actually get that BIS. Now, I know some of you will be like confused by that statement. You'll be like, I want the best there is. I am the best there is. I'm going to get every best in-slot item I can. Fine, you might be of that persuasion. For me, I would much rather mess about with gear sets, right? I'd rather have different ones. Here I've got my Thorkai build where I'm using bow and hammer. Here I've got my Porkai build, which to be fair, I was actually using bow and Mjolnir, but it's meant to be musket now, I just haven't changed it. But you know, I've got a few different sets, right? I'd rather just play around with different builds. I've got a fire staff build in here somewhere, and I'd rather just get to like good enough, enjoy my time, and then not really bother pushing for that last sort of like 5 or 10%. There's no right way to play it, right? Either's fine. You could have one build in pure BIS, or you could spread it around a little bit and have a bit of fun. Now, the devs sort of said they wanted people to try different builds. However, it's not that easy to get that pure BIS that they sort of thought that they would be. Like, they sort of said they wanted it to be easy to get BIS. It's not. It's easy to get close to BIS, and it is easier than it used to be, but it's not easy to get BIS, right? It's easier, but not easy. So you sort of have a difficult conversation to have with yourself. Do you push for that final last 10%, or do you just actually enjoy the game with different builds and be like 95% strong? There's no right way. There's no right answer. But what I think the progression overall has, like, not going for it, like, I think it's actually a bad thing. What is the reason to do the content when you've got most of the gear that you want? Like, M3s right now, you can get gear score 695, 700 gear score. Mostly it's all going to be BOP, by the way, because I don't know if it's a bug or what have you, but most of the gear you get from these are BOP, which means it's bound to you, which means you can't sell it. So why would you do these unless you need the gear? Like, nobody's doing them right now, and honestly, I'm not surprised. There's reasons to do M1s because that's how you get artifacts and stuff like that. Not many reasons to do M3s. There are mounts in 3 of the dungeons, but it's really not that anything special. But there's not really much reason to do it. And honestly, most of the people actually doing this content right now are probably speedrunners, because that's all that's left. There's not much else reason to anybody do this kind of stuff unless you want artifacts, but once you've got the artifacts, you're done. And it's sort of the same for PvP, except PvP for me is more fun in New World. Arenas aren't being done because they nerfed them and they buffed out Push Rush, so anybody who actually wants like XP and PvP reward track rewards and want to feel like you're being rewarded for your time, well, you just play out Push Rush. There's a couple of people who just enjoy Arena, and when I say a couple of people, it's generally like the same 10 people on Barry all playing, but I enjoy it nonetheless. But for me, I'm just doing the stuff that I find fun. And I would put it to you that in most MMOs, PvE is only fun because of progression, or at least that sense of achievement. And New World, I think, really fails there. So there is no real progression from doing like one M3 to a next. It's not like we have a raid every 3 months where, like, you know, I do the worm and then I do the next raid or anything like that. We just simply don't have that. Sure, you can get a sense of achievement from golding an M3 and getting on the leaderboard, but honestly, this is going to be a little bit controversial. I think the PvE in New World is just not that fun, and there's some drastic changes that they probably should make. And I know most of you aren't going to agree with this, but I don't care. I think they need to remove the time from counting to bronze, silver, or gold. I would almost just get rid of bronze, silver, or gold. Maybe keep the leaderboard there, but just sort of have it a little bit more hidden so that not everybody feels like they have to do them. And give people reward every time that they do it. That's quite significant. Now, I know that might come with a group finder, when you can actually just pick, I want to go into a random dungeon, get me in. I know you're going to get gold and that kind of stuff, right? But like, give me something that feels like I'm actually progressing. Give me a token that I can spend for gear. I know that's basically the materia system, but I don't know, make it more satisfying. The progression loop, honestly, I think it just sort of falls short. Now, that's for somebody who's playing a lot, who feels like they've got most of what they need. I don't have pure BIS, right? I just don't have it, but I don't really feel the need. So I'm sort of completed it, if you know what I mean. For somebody who's new to the game, maybe you've just logged in, you've started in Everfor, you're level 10 or whatever, right? And you've got all this to look forward to. Yeah, there's content for you to do. But once you get to your near BIS status, you're going to run into the same end game issue, right? In most previous MMOs that I've done, when I've been doing dungeons, the reason I do the dungeons is not for some speed running reward. I do the dungeon because there's something from the dungeon that I want and that I need. I'm trying to progress myself. Now, I think this is a whole conversation about vertical and horizontal progression. I don't know what Guild Wars 2 is like. I've never really tried it. But the kind of progression that we could have could purely be cosmetics. A little bit like speedrunning, but maybe take away speedrunning, because I think PvE speedrunning is just not that fun. But I was talking to Male Oreo on stream today. You could do something like it's on the leaderboard. You could just make it say, like, let's say each season you got like, you did an M3 100 times or whatever, right? Once you did it 100 times, you get a skin. Not like a competitive skin. It's just like prestige. Like, look, I grinded this out and I did it. Oh, I did an invasion last night. Like, there's loads of stuff you could do to put cosmetics behind content. It doesn't necessarily have to be player power, but I think player power is definitely a greater incentive than cosmetics. Right now, I'd love to see more cosmetics because I think like that's the direction they're going in. I think we'll get actual progression again in the next expansion, but we need proper progression. The loop just doesn't feel very satisfying. It feels a little bit underwhelming, and it does sort of make the game great for casuals because it's relatively easy to catch up, except it's not, because everything costs an absolute shed ton of gold. So to be vaguely competitive, you have to grind a lot and farm stuff, and I don't want the answer to that to be dailies. But yeah, for casuals, I've always said this, I've said this for a long time. New World is almost the most like casual friendly MMO out there, except it isn't, because it just requires you to grind in unfun content like farming bananas or something, which to be fair, some of you might enjoy, but a lot of you might not. And I think they need to address this somehow, but I don't think whatever's happening, I don't know where my character's gone, I think whatever's happening is probably not happening until September next year when we get another expansion. Because when we look at what content's coming, we have a 10-man dungeon. Something will come in Season 6, I obviously don't know what that is, but in Season 5 it's a 10-man dungeon, which is great, but what rewards can they possibly give us? They said it's going to be like they're going to make it so you only have to do it a couple of times and you'll get a lot of rewards. But what's it going to be? Is it going to be gold? Is it going to be materials? Is it going to be items? Do you know what? I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. But I think progression overall, it's better now than it used to be. It's better than Ward and Bane. Like Ward and Bane at least was progression, but it was awful and very gatekeepy. So this system's better than that. But I think they sort of blasted through the progression a little bit quickly. Like to get from gear score 600 to 700 isn't very hard. It can be quite quick, and it was sort of quick when we got the expansion as well, so it's not like that's anything new just because you can buy the stuff. And I think that sort of meant there was no progression. We just had a reset really without any progression, which I think just felt bad. I've rambled a lot, but to be fair, that's sort of the idea of this channel. I'm just sort of going to ramble a little bit and say what I'm thinking a little bit more. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Big shout out to my Patreons. I do need to update this list. I'm sorry, it's been Christmas. I've been super busy and I'm actually a little bit under the weather. Come and follow me over on Twitch. I'm actually going to be streaming like probably now as you see this, right? Or tonight. Like I'm streaming tonight. Come and watch. Please, please don't leave me alone. Have a beautiful night. Bye, subscribe. Goodbye.